Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The federal budget will be released this afternoon, and the government says it's making it no secret it is targeting Gen Z and millennials. They're calling it generational fairness. What would generational fairness look like to you? That's up first. In half an hour, yes, teens face many challenges nowadays, not just economic. We'll speak to a pediatrician about learning resilience and problem solving. And you can tell us about the lessons you and your teen have learned. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And you can call us now on our top story. Regarding the federal budget, what would generational fairness look like to you? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we have been getting glimpses into the federal budget for weeks now. The government says this budget will focus on fairness for every generation. Speaking to Millennials and Gen Z, who Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says now make up the majority of Canada's labor force. So from a renter's bill of rights, a housing infrastructure fund, and a youth mental health fund, the announcements over the last few weeks have pointed to targeting youth. On the other side, a new wealth tax is reportedly being proposed, according to sources who spoke with Radio-Canada. And now in 1 hour, you can listen and watch CBC's budget special as Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tables her fourth federal budget. We are asking you on the open line, what would generational fairness look like to you in the federal budget? If you're a millennial or Gen Z, would looking at generational fairness help you at all? If you're older, what are your thoughts? Does this help you or your children? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Joining me now is Sanjay Jaram, Senior Lecturer in Political Science at Simon Fraser University. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What goes through your mind when you hear the government speak about generational fairness? Why do you think the focus on that?
I guess you could take the skeptical position, which is that politically, these are the demographics that they need to recapture if they have any chance of holding on to government in 2025 or even having a non-disastrous showing. I mean, I suppose you could take the more positive approach, which is that, it is true, right? That one of the statements in the way they've packaged what they've get to hold us so far is that this is now the demographic that essentially is the biggest part of the workforce, and their future is Canada's future. And so maybe the recognition that we haven't paid enough attention to the sort of mismatch between the income possibilities and the cost of living for that generation specifically.
Right. And, looking at the politics of it, how much of this is about winning back that youth vote that helped the Liberals back in 2015. What do we know about the sentiment right now among millennials and Gen Z voters?
So Gen Z in particular is interesting because I guess the sort of, especially the younger Gen Zers weren't really politically aware at the time when Justin Trudeau was first elected in 2015.
Right.
Perhaps to some extent, they don't see Justin Trudeau as this sort of change hopeful candidate with that, and they've always seen him as they've come of political age in a context where he's just been the establishment, and what they've seen perhaps for their own personal lives is despair, high costs, and so perhaps they just sort of associate this local government with that. So it's a really different ball game than what he was able to do with millennial voters in 2015, who were at that point sort of making the transition into the labor market, starting families, and he really kind of sold the message that he was a candidate that had their backs. So trying to win back millennials and to win Gen Zs for the first time, newer ones, it's very challenging because the Conservatives do really well with older demographics, and that's sort of a stable factor of our election. So they really have to do to get both of those demographics on board for them.
Right. And, we've also heard a lot from seniors who say they're struggling as well. There were rallies just a few weeks ago organized by a group called the Seniors Tin Cup, saying their pensions just are not keeping up with the cost of living. And so, what might this mean? We don't know the details of the budget yet. There have been a lot of announcements already, but where do older generations fit into this?
It's a really good question. There isn't really much specifically that I've seen in the tidbits that they've revealed so far that would say that they're looking to that generation. I mean, you've even heard, I mean, I don't think this is going to be something that's going to be in this budget, but I've heard many calls for perhaps some sort of wealth transition or a generational tax on wealth that's being transferred, but from the baby boomers to younger generations. I mean, I think there's this assumption that this problem of senior poverty, of senior struggling under this, is not a real or major issue, but it obviously is. Again, we don't have exact numbers to talk about, but it doesn't seem like that's a particular focus, right? When they say generational fairness, there aren't really any kind of goodies in that budget, at least that we've seen so far, that to me seem really tailored to seniors.
Let's just going through some of the details that have been announced in spending so far. Some of them Canadians, a renter's bill of rights, a $15 million tenant protection fund, touting the plan to roll out the first phase of national pharmacare, $1 billion over 5 years to fund a new national school food program, and $1 billion for that Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. And that tops up the Housing Accelerator Fund by $400 million. So just some of the announcements we've heard already as the government MPs have been traveling around the country touting the upcoming budget that will be announced in about 45 minutes from now. You can watch and listen to the CBC and watch our live coverage on the federal budget in about 45 minutes, starting at 1 o'clock Pacific time. And we're asking you, given what the government is saying is the focus of this budget, generational fairness for all generations, we're asking you, what would that look like for you? If you are a younger voter, what do you think that means? What are you looking for? If you're older, what are your thoughts on how you will be affected by this budget? It's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Kim is joining us from Fraser Lake. Hi, Kim. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes. What do you make of the generational fairness theme?
Well, I have a few issues. One, we have a son that is going to soon be 20 years old. I'm in my 50s. My husband's in my 60s. So we have, a few generations to cover. Mm-hmm. But as our budget comes down today, and the Liberals want to show that, yes, we're coming in on a white horse. We're going to save everything. But it drives me crazy, and that they're the ones over the last 7-8 years that have put us into this financial wreck. And it just gets me so hot under the collar that the younger generations, are the ones that are going to have to pay the most amount over however many years to come out from under this absolutely incredible, terrible spending. So I just think that it is just, I think when the next federal election comes, we seriously have to think and look at what the Liberals have done. Not what they're promising to do, but what kind of financial precarious position are we in now because of them.
What's been the impact on someone, say, like your son who's 19? What are some of the things that you observed over the last few years that affect him?
Oh, for example, so we live in BC. Our son is going to Lethbridge College. He's taking criminology. My husband and I are both RCMP officers. We're both retired. And the cost of putting him through college to be able to get a diploma in a degree is absolutely astronomical. And I can understand now why the majority of Canadians cannot afford to put their children through school. Yet in order for our kids to be able to get good positions, to be able to even remotely live comfortably, the cost is just, I just blink. I think that right now we're paying about $1,600 a month just for his accommodation.
Okay, so housing, student housing.
Yes, yes. And that is if you can find housing. So, and the cost of going to school, the cost of absolutely everything is so astronomical that I just feel so terrible for the younger generation. And I can honestly see why mental health issues are at an all-time high between the ages of 18 and 35 because they've been given an absolute, I won't swear on radio, but something
Thank you.
show.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's incredibly unfair. And I think that, I really hope that Pierre Poilievre gets in because I think that is the only way that Canada is actually going to go back to being a wonderful country again.
And what do you see from Pierre Poilievre when it comes to budgetary plans or promises?
Oh my God, common sense. I am so tired of listening to Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau with silver spoons that I see them on TV, I hear their voices on the radio, and it just makes me cringe. I think that Pierre Poilievre is somebody who has come from a blue-collar worker, as myself and my husband's family has. I think that he has a common sense approach to spending, and I think that he's really got 2 feet on the ground when it comes to making decisions that are not only good for him and his family, but it's also good for Canadian families.
Okay. Kim, thank you very much for the call from Fraser Lake. And for Pierre Poilievre, when it comes to what he's looking for in this budget, he says it's time to fix the budget and stop inflationary spending that he argues is driving up the average family's interest obligations. Let me go back to my guest, Sanjay Jaram. I know we have only a couple more minutes left with you. What do you take from that call? There it is, right? The politics behind where this budget is hoping to go. And how people might be taking it.
There's obviously that no matter what the Liberals do, there's going to be a political response to the choices they make. They obviously have to walk balance because at one level, even thinking about their own demographics, you forget about trying to win over those who are convinced or who are going to vote Conservative anyways. But they recognize that some of their cohort their voter base owns homes, and if this spending in this budget perhaps tips towards inflation, and we don't get the interest rate cut that people are expecting or need for relief. At the other side of the coin, some of the programs, for example, if the investments in daycare that they're making aren't enough to get the provinces to roll out the programs in more efficiently and quickly, then those waiting on lists are going to be disappointed. So there's a lot at stake for them. It's challenging to be a government this far into their term. And so this sort of general notion that they've spent, the country essentially on affordability. I mean, it's a really hard claim to just sort of make as a general sort of statement because obviously the pandemic had a huge role in the sort of financial situation that we're in, and it continues to. At the same time, right, it's difficult to make that. There isn't really a clear case out there to say that, for example, programs like universal daycare or expanding pharmacare at this point, which both of those programs, for example, Poilievre is skeptical about, it isn't clear that those are going to not end up being sort of beneficial in the long run for a larger amount of Canadians and end up saving us money. But again, these are projections that are for economists to speculate about, and the problem is politics is short term, and so. Really, no matter what Justin Trudeau says and Chrystia Freeland says at this point, I think it's going to be looked at unfavorably by those who are sort of have lost faith in the government.
It's a long political line. I'll just ask you before I let you go. That point that she said that this is going to saddle future generations like her 19-year-old son. There is a lot of spending in the budget. We know from all the announcements. So, are they risking that kind of reaction from young people that this is something they'll have to pay for in the future?
It really depends on whether the programs that are developed, I think, land with, for example, if people see the impact of the housing investments in terms of, that's the problem, right? Is that housing investments take a long time to translate down to the sticker price of the condo or townhouse or house that someone in the next year or two is going to buy. For example, like the demographic she was talking about, I'm at the sort of top end of that demographic, and I had that same issue is that I, despite the fact that our provincial government here had done all sorts of things, I went out and had to, and it seems like the prices have just gotten worse, and so this is the problem, is that we don't really have a short-term fix for something like housing. It's really the accumulation of bad luck, times, political decisions early on through different levels of government, not only the feds, not the provinces, not the municipalities, but a confluence of decisions made in the past times some sort of extemporaneous factors that are out of our control have put us here. And I think we have to realize that it's going to take concentrate. It starts now, but it's going to take a long time to sort of dig us out of something as problematic as the cost of housing compared to salaries. It really, the fact that the likelihood that anybody will see any change on those things, other than sort of perhaps maybe in the rental market and things like that, very quickly, is probably unlikely. So, I mean, I guess to go back to your question, the truth is probably I don't know that many voters who at this point are skeptical of the government are going to be able to be won back by this budget, because obviously it contains a lot of measures that are targeted at the problems that they're concerned about. But I think the impacts are going to take, if there are any, are going to take too long for those who are feeling it right now.
Sanjay Jaram, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
That's Sanjay Jaram, Senior Lecturer in Political Science at Simon Fraser University. And we are going to go back to our callers now. And yes, when we're talking about numbers, the announcements over the last few weeks add up to more than $38 billion in commitments over a number of years. $17 billion of those commitments involve loan-based programs, and about $21 billion could hit the government's bottom line directly. And we're asking you, when it comes to generational fairness, that is the theme of this budget that's going to be released and tabled by the federal finance minister this afternoon. What does generational fairness look like to you? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Mike is calling us now from Prince George. Hi, Mike.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And what are your thoughts on generational fairness?
I think it's absurd about this generational fairness direction of the budget, when it's the Prime Minister and his cohorts have taken this generation and put them into a massive debt that they won't ever see paid off. And, one of the reasons he was able to do that was that most younger people don't even understand their credit card bills. They don't understand that when the government overspends by $50 billion, it's not like they're going to pay that back. All they're going to do is pay to carry the debt. Now imagine, putting it on a level that maybe a young person could understand is, imagine for the last, 10 years, all you've been doing is putting money on, buying things with your credit card and just paying the interest. You're not paying down the debt. You're just paying the interest. And the amount of money that we pay for interest now would buy these programs that they want. But we are now saddled with so much debt that we have to carry. My grandchildren will never see it paid off.
Do you have grandchildren that you're worried about right now?
No, soon. But, I'll tell you, my son laughed at me, chuckled at me when the beginning of the pandemic spending started. And he looked at me and he said, "Geez, Dad, aren't you upset with all the money the government's throwing around?" And I laughed right back at him and said, "Son, I'll be dead. You're the one paying it back, you and your children."
Was there any benefit to yourself or your children during the pandemic when it came to perhaps, supports or business supports and things like that?
No, I'm self-employed. I was essential service, so I worked through the pandemic. I didn't take any government money, and a lot of Canadians didn't take it. The thing about that pandemic spending is that there's countries that did it for a lot less. The same thing. They kept the people's rent paid. They kept the grocery store stocked. They did everything that we did for a third or less. The government, the Liberal government, they just threw so much money out the door with no controls, no questions, that they bought a Mercedes when they should have been buying a Volkswagen.
Mike, thank you so much for the call from Prince George.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Janet is up next now in Burnaby. Janet, your thoughts on generational fairness as the theme of the budget?
Hi.
Hi there. Welcome.
I think the Millennials and Gen X have been put in a really awkward situation. I think they've been tied down under terrible rents, which other older generations are gaining the benefits of having bought 2 or 3 different houses and selling and having high rents. So at the moment, I think Justin Trudeau's in a very difficult position, and Philippe Poilievre isn't offering anything for them. To me, common sense and I'm not Justin Trudeau isn't going to help Generation X or Millennials. He's not put anything in place to cater for their needs, because their needs are completely different to those of Boomers and Generation X. I'm Generation X, but I can see that people of my age, if I was their age, I was in a much better position than they are now. It's very difficult to be able to cater for older people and younger people, and older people seem to have a much louder voice, and they're able to maybe say things that aren't necessarily true, and because they've already made up their minds about their position. So I'm not really sure how Justin Trudeau kind of balances the line here.
Yeah. Interesting. And as we heard from our from Sanjay Jaram earlier, who said, in terms of who does turn out to vote, historically that has been older voters. So thinking about that too. Really good to hear. Yeah, Janet, go ahead. I just have about a minute left.
I think, if you've got nothing to vote for, why do you vote as a young person? So I think this is sometimes having even been heard will help.
So it's
because, sorry, carry on.
No, pardon me. It's sort of what are the options in front of you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think older people have a lot louder voices, and I don't think just being good at common sense isn't really going to help the government or the country either.
Thank you very much, Janet, for the call. Good to hear from you in Burnaby. And it is now 12:28, 1:28 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. And much more, of course, on the budget throughout the day here on CBC Radio and CBC Television, and on the top stories around the region. And for Metro Vancouver, here's what's coming up on the Coast.
Michelle, hi there. It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us for On the Coast later this afternoon. We're going to talk about apples. Yeah, how about them apples? We'll learn about a new variety of gala apple. This one is the Arctic Gala. It apparently doesn't even go brown, so you'll hear more about that. And also, local crime author Sam Wiebe has a brand new book out. It's called Ocean Drive. It's been described as a Pacific Northwest Fargo. So Sam will be here to talk about how he uses real-life reporting as inspiration for his books. I hope you can join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Gloria, thank you. We'll certainly join you this afternoon. That's On the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver. Some emails now on generational fairness. Sammy writes, generational fairness would be for elder seniors and young adults having a comfortable, decent home to live in with space to move with fair rent. And Jack writes, the adoption of a means test to determine eligibility for subsidized government programs would be the best step toward achieving generational fairness. How is it fair that seniors with assets of $1 million are eligible for free dental at the expense of younger taxpayers? Lots more emails coming. Send them to us, bctoday@cbc.ca. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. We have some more calls coming your way on what does generational fairness look like to you? And that's in light of the federal budget that will be released this afternoon. And coming up at 1 o'clock, budget special on CBC Television and CBC Radio 1 will begin. That's 1 o'clock Pacific time. Right now it is 12:30, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone, and time for a CBC News update. And here's Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Statistics Canada says the inflation rate here in BC remained almost steady in March as higher gas prices were countered by cooling core inflation. The data shows the rate at 2.7% last month, up slightly from 2.6% in February. As we've been hearing on the show, today is Budget Day in Ottawa. CBC will have special coverage of today's budget speech. Susan Bonner and Catherine Cullen will have all the details beginning at 1 o'clock Pacific. A 29-year-old Burnaby man has been charged with second-degree murder in connection with the death of a woman in the Killarney neighborhood in East Vancouver earlier this month. The victim has been identified as 49-year-old Gertrude Chong. Police say the suspect, Eric Lau of Burnaby, knew the victim, but details weren't released. And Vancouver park rangers have been removing some tents at Crab Park and asking others to take down temporary structures. Today's enforcement is focused on a hillside where about a dozen tents had been set up. The area is outside the designated sheltering zone. And now the forecast on the north coast. Sunny this afternoon with a high of 11, highs around 3 and clearing in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 6, highs from 5 to 9 with a chance of showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 11. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon with highs around 12 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Everyone's waiting for the sun to come out.
It's looking pretty good, Michelle.
Yeah, it sure
Lovely
is.
Day.
Yes, making some plans as we see it. I went up to Quarry Rock on the weekend.
Oh, nice.
Oh, it was lovely. Yeah, just breathtaking views from up there.
When the weather is nice here, it is super nice here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It leans into that super nice for sure. But yeah, and then more people come and then your view's blocked. But that's okay. That's another story.
That is.
Rob, thanks so much.
Sure.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today here on CBC. And yes, lots more on the day's top stories as well coming up this afternoon in your region. For our listeners in the interior and northern BC, here's what's coming up on Radio West.
Hi, Michelle. Sarah Penton here with Radio West. Coming up today on the program, we return to West Kelowna and speak with people who lost their homes in last summer's McDougall Creek wildfire. 8 months later, and the recovery continues, both physically and emotionally.
And it's very much a parallel, like all the stages that you go through where you can't believe it, and then you're kind of angry, and then why me, and all those things. And then it's not linear. You know, you jump back from thinking everything's going to be okay to then being overwhelmed and not confident in your ability to keep moving ahead. But then that's normal. It's good to normalize those kinds of feelings.
So that's today on Radio West. Also on the program, we've got plenty of budget talk, what today's federal budget means for you and your own money. That's coming up today on Radio West, BC's afternoon program in the interior and the north. We're up from 4 to 6 o'clock Pacific time. You can listen to us on your radio or anywhere, anytime on the CBC Listen app.
More on the federal budget now, just ahead of a CBC radio special, and you can catch the visual special on CBC Gem and CBC News app as well. That's coming up in just about 25 minutes from now. And we have been asking you, what would generational fairness look like to you, given that that has been the focus of the budget announcement so far? Frank is calling us in Victoria. Hi, Frank.
Hi. I just wanted to say there's no doubt with what everybody's calling it about that the spending is way over. I think the Liberals always done that. If you look at Justin's dad, too, he did the same thing way back in the 70s and 80s. But what I like to see in this budget is something also for the seniors, You've had a lot of people call in and say how they're worried, about what's going to happen. I'm going to be 65 next year. I'm finishing off my years driving the school buses, and yeah, the CPP and OAS, it's going to be really hard surviving on that, and especially right now, I'm paying $1,300 a month, which is almost one paycheck, So it's hard, and I hope they do something. And I like when Jackman talks about taxing the rich and going after the people. I think that's going to be a good way to do it too, because there's a lot of people making lots of money and way too much, giving big bonuses being paid out, at the end of the year, and I just think that I'd like to see something for the seniors and have the rich people get pay their tax.
Do you feel, given the coverage so far, that seniors are being left out of the budget, Frank?
Well, what I've heard is I haven't heard the whole thing, but
Yeah,
I think that
fair.
I haven't heard the whole thing, but I'd like to. That's what I'm hoping to hear, like at 1 o'clock, and hope that they will do a little bit more for seniors and have more seniors housing too, because, like I said, that's the only way for me to survive when I retire is to move to a seniors home and pay according to what my income is, and like I said, I know that tax and I think when it comes to groceries too, that we've heard this. I don't know why farmers can't just sell their food, like have markets,
What's it like for you getting groceries? What's it like for you?
It's expensive, like I said. And you walk out with a bag, and it used to be, like I said, I remember in the 70s, 80s. You walked out with a good two bags or 3 bags. Today, you walk out with half a bag, and it's like $40, $50. And the other thing I was saying to your producers, I find though I live in the Gordon Head area, and that's one thing I don't understand. They say we can't find employees. I don't know if they're still going through that, but what I see a lot of students there where I live, and they really don't work. Like I'm just because they're referring to that lady that was saying she was paying $1,200 for her son, but in Gordon Head, I see a lot of young people are just having a good time. Like I don't see them working. Their car's always parked there.
Well, Frank, thank you very much for all the best to you. Thanks for the call from Victoria. People have anecdotes, right, about what they see as well around them. Jillian is up next now in Port Alberni. Hi, Jillian. What are your thoughts on generational fairness?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for giving us all a chance to vent. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. All of the generations are struggling with finances, and seniors on limited incomes, and students, and young families, and everybody. But Christy Freeland had the nerve to blow $200 on a pair of brand new shoes. She should have bought her shoes at a thrift store if she wanted to demonstrate any kind of solidarity with the rest of us. The whole new shoes thing is it smacks of arrogance. And I'm sure there are thrift stores all over the place that would love to serve our local politicians.
Jillian, thank you very much. The symbolism of that tradition of purchasing shoes by the finance minister. Thanks for the call, Jillian, in Port Alberni. Thank you for all of your calls. You can email us on generational fairness. And as you watch and listen to coverage of the budget special, you can certainly email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. We're going to keep focusing on the younger generation right now, from the economy through living the effects of the pandemic as kids, dealing with social media. Teens are going through a lot right now and a lot of stress. Well, tonight at UBC's Green College, pediatrician and author Dr. Zung Vo will focus on how teens can develop strength and resilience. And Dr. Vo will join us in a moment. We're asking you as well, what are the challenges your teen and yourself are dealing with right now in your household? And how are you and your teen navigating them? What's helped you to be resilient that perhaps you'd like to share with young people? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. Dr. Dzung Vo is author of The Mindful Teen, Powerful Skills to Help You Handle Stress One Moment at a Time. He's a pediatrician and head of the Division of Adolescent Health and Medicine at BC Children's Hospital and at UBC. Dr. Vo, good afternoon. Welcome. So good to have you.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm very interested in this, having two teens myself. First, you specialize in adolescent medicine. What does that mean for you? What kind of work do you do?
Adolescent medicine is a subspecialty of pediatrics. So as pediatricians, we care for children and youth of all ages. And in adolescent medicine, we specialize in that area of life, that time frame that is, between 10 to 19 or sometimes early 20s, where there is so much happening in their lives, in their brain development. And we focus on adolescents as whole people, looking at both their physical health, what's happening in their bodies, as well as their mental health, what's happening in their minds, as well as their social health, what's happening in their families and their social environment. So we're holistic pediatricians for teenagers.
Wow, that's really fascinating. What's it like for you to do this kind of work personally?
Oh, I love it. I'm very biased, but I think teenagers are amazing, incredible. It's a really wonderful time of life. It's a wonderful opportunity for them to learn, for them to grow. Yes, sometimes make mistakes. Yes, sometimes get into trouble. And then our job as adults is to catch them and help guide them so that way they can maximize their potential and have a positive future. But it's such a fun, creative, energizing, and intense time of life. And I really love working with teenagers.
Intense seems to be a word that is thrown around and emblematic of teen life right now. Is it particularly challenging these days?
Yeah, it does certainly seem to be that way. I think teenagers are experiencing many challenges these days. We've seen even before the pandemic happened, the rates of teen mental health issues were rising, especially around anxiety and depression and substance use. And then during the pandemic was a really hard time for teenagers as well as for elderly, as you discussed in your previous segment. I think they struggled the most. And we've seen certainly rates of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and substance use increase quite a lot in the last few years. So it's a hard time to be a teenager right now.
And I imagine people may even think that's done with, right? And not realize the prolonged effects perhaps of what teens went through. They sure did. I watched it, right? Going to school, not going to school, anxiety around the pandemic and the virus, and just uncertainty and what effect that might have in the long term. And you talk about substance use as well. We're covering the ongoing toxic drug crisis. It is drug toxicity now the leading cause of death, of unnatural death among young people. For a parent who just might feel at a loss for how to deal with this, we hear from a lot of parents here on the show. What would you say to them? What kind of advice would help them?
I think the first thing for parents to know is that you matter. You matter so much for your teenagers, even if it doesn't always seem like that every day, even if there's times where your teenager might be pushing back or they might seem like sharing with you everything. You are the most important person in their lives. You are the most important protective factor, you as well as other caring, loving adults. And so your presence as well as your unconditional love have a huge impact in your teenagers. So I would say that would be the number one thing.
Okay. And let me put out the numbers as well. Let us know. You can call in. What are some of the challenges your teens have been going through, and how do you navigate that in your household? If you have any lessons about resilience that you'd like to share, maybe something you learned as a teen yourself, you can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email as well, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm very happy to have on the show right now Dr. Zung Vo, who is an author and pediatrician who specializes in adolescent medicine. He's giving a talk tonight at 5 o'clock at UBC's Green College. And, I'm fascinated by how you look at the positive side, right? You call this the amazing teen. When is stress and when are those challenges actually useful? What are some of the tools that teens can employ to actually push through, persevere, and get something out of that situation?
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed the positive aspect of my talk.
Sure
because
did,
I think
yeah.
for so long, adults and including health professionals and researchers had focused on the negative aspects of adolescence, all of the problems, all of the risks, all of the trouble that teenagers get into. And that's really only half the picture. And in the last 20 to 30 years, leaders in our field have been really looking at what are the things that help adolescents succeed, even in the face of adversity, even in the face of stress. And as you mentioned, stress has an important role. Stress is part of life. It's unavoidable. And so our goal with teenagers is not to prevent stress or to avoid it, but it's how do we help them to learn how to cope with it? And that's actually one of the important tasks of adolescence, one of the most important things that they need to learn during that time period is, how do I cope with stress? How do I cope with adversity? And that's something that they need to go through, they need to experience, make mistakes, learn from experience, and grow. And that's also something that's really important for adults to help guide them in, which is one of the things that I talk about in my clinical practice on an almost daily basis. One of the most important things of adolescence.
I bet. I, I hear from my teens all the time, just stressors from school, more existential challenges or thoughts, and dilemmas, or just someone you're not getting along with, right? So what can a teen do? First of all, you're dealing with all these kind of strong emotions. First of all, what are the first steps that you can take?
The first step is individual, and I think you can look at it both the individual as well as the social aspect. So, an individual aspect, the first step is to help teenagers recognize that strong emotions are normal. They are part of life, and that we don't need to run away from them. We don't need to hide or be scared or cover them up, even when they're uncomfortable. And we can communicate that both through what we say. For example, if a teenager says, "Mom, I'm really stressed right now. I'm really anxious about this test," we can say something like, "Anxiety is normal. It's okay to be stressed." Or we could say something like, "Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine." And that second message actually sends a message that, well, I'm not supposed to have stress, or there's something wrong with me for feeling anxious. And so they're less likely to actually talk about it. But if we go that first direction and say, it's okay to feel anxious when there's something really difficult going on, you're having a conflict with a friend, or you're worried about school. So number one, stress is normal, anxiety is normal. And then number two, what matters is, how do we handle it? How do we meet that stress? And there's many, many tools that we can use, coping strategies such as mindfulness, such as exercise, such as healthy eating, such as connection. And there's, entire toolkits that we can help equip teenagers with to learn how to manage that stress. And we can practice those things with them, and we can also role model those things with them. And that's actually even more important than what we say, because when parents say to a teenager, "You should try X, Y, and Z to manage your stress," but the parent themselves is not actually doing those things in their own life and talking about those things, it's not as powerful a message. And in fact, it undercuts the message.
They're watching you, right? They're always watching you.
What you say, what you do is more important than what you say with teenagers.
Dr. Dzung Vo is with me. Let's take a call here as we ask you, what are some of the challenges you're going through? How are you navigating them with your teen? And what are some lessons perhaps that you'd like to impart on gaining resilience? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Heather is joining us from Salmon Arm. Hi there, Heather.
Hello. I just have a quick question on supports and wins with teens, because I've got a son who is diagnosed with ADHD. He's well aware of his challenges, but he doesn't want to address any of them, and it has relational challenges and everything that goes along with it.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering about supports in smaller areas that aren't necessarily the Lower Mainland or the Kelownas. And how do you get them to hear the wins? Because the bad parts are always so loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. The bad parts are always so loud. So finding the wins. I love that. I think that's certainly a very relatable question. Heather, thank you so much. All the best to you and your son, okay? Yes. So I don't know if you're aware or of any supports in the Salmon Arm area in the interior, Dr. Vo.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of getting connected to resources is definitely a challenge throughout British Columbia, and there are some areas that are better served, and there's some areas that are inequitably served. Ideally, there are family doctors, there are pediatricians, there is child and youth mental health, which is the public arm of the mental health service, which is run differently in different different regions of the province. Sometimes it's operated through Ministry of Children and Family Development. Other times it's operated through the local health authorities. And to find help, there is the Kelty Mental Health Resource Center, which is based at BC Children's Hospital, which helps people kind of navigate those difficult systems. And then there is also the COMPASS program through BC Children's Hospital, which is a consultant service for family doctors, for therapists, for pediatricians when they're working with a young person and they need some kind of specialized advice. But I will admit the mental health system can be difficult to navigate. I think on the question about how to see those wins, I'm so
Yeah.
glad, Heather, that you asked the question, because my work is largely based on what we call strength-based communication, and that's the foundation of adolescent medicine, where we look for those wins, we look for the strengths, we look for what the adolescent is doing well, not only what they're not doing well, not only the problems, but the successes. And we actually train ourselves to call those out, to ask about them. And, it might take, a ratio of 5 to 1. You have to celebrate 5 successes to noticing every one problem in order to be able to build on those successes. But when we're able to do that, that actually builds internal motivation, it builds connection, and those are all really important protective factors. But we have to make a conscious effort to do that.
Wow, I really love that question, finding the wins. I try to ask what was something that made you feel good today. Looking for those wins. I relate to that as well. Thank you so much, Heather. All the best to you in Salmon Arm. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And Dr. Vo, you said something earlier, let them make mistakes. That may feel a little daunting to a parent. What do you mean by that, and why is it a good thing to encourage perhaps teens to make mistakes?
Adolescents need to learn from experience. When they're 10 or 12 years old, they don't know how to handle those big emotions or those difficult situations at school or with their peers. And the only way they can learn how to manage those situations, manage those emotions, is actually to go through it. And as adults, we can't actually shelter young people from it, even though we may try. And the problem is that if we try to shelter them from it, number one, it sends the message that they're not supposed to go through it. And the other thing is it doesn't let them to be prepared for when it does happen later in life. So the challenge for adults is to let them make mistakes, but also set boundaries around safety. So there has to be mistakes made so they can learn from it. We can't just tell them, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. They have to learn from experience. But we also have to set boundaries when, safety and life is at risk. So that is the challenge of parenting. And there's a lot of great resources on parenting styles. This is called authoritative parenting. Sometimes it's called dolphin parenting or lighthouse parenting, drawing from the work of leaders in the field like Shimi Kang and Berg, who have written really great work on this. So it's that balance of, graduated responsibility as they show they're ready for it, and limits to keep them safe, so that way they can make those mistakes and learn without putting their lives at risk.
Okay, I can imagine anyone who's a parent listening right now just going, yes, I'm going to write that down. We actually have a grandparent who's emailed us. Joanne writes, we have teenage grandchildren. We see the negative influence social media has had when it was in its infancy. When my daughter was in her teens, I was pressured to provide her a cell phone. Now we have teen grandchildren, and the anxiety, stress, and pressure because of the idyllic lives posted online is definitely contributing to these health issues. That must be, that's true, right? What you see is just the perfectly curated life online, and that it can make you feel inadequate. What impact is it having on teens, and how can they be more critical as they sift through and scroll through social media?
That's such an important question. I think the impacts of social media are not fully known right now, and it's something that researchers have really intense debates about how much or is social media driving these mental health conditions that we're seeing right now. So I'm not going to get into the weeds of all of those debates, but what I will say is that most people do agree, most researchers and clinicians do agree on a few things. Number one, they do agree that sleep is really important, and that there is worry that when young people are on social media and their devices late at night, that's impacting sleep. And sleep is really, really critical for adolescent brain development and resilience and for coping. So anything that we can do to help young people get better sleep is super important. And that includes, monitoring or maybe restricting cell phone use. Number two, modeling. So how are adults using our devices? And so when a parent asks me, my teenager's on their device at home, like at dinner table, And I really don't like that. And I tell them to stop, but they won't. My first question is, well, what are you doing? Where's your device at the dinner table or, at bedtime? So I think any changes that need to happen with the whole family. So maybe there's a family kind of practice or tradition where we all put our devices in a box during the dinner time or after in the evening. So that way we can all do this together.
I love that. Just a minute left here. And what's your general message tonight then?
I think look for the things that you love about teenagers. Be there unconditionally, even when they make mistakes. Help to guide them, help to support them, let them know that you believe in them, so that way they can reach their full potential and have a positive future.
What a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Dr. Dzung Vo is a pediatrician at BC Children's Hospital and author of The Mindful Teen, Powerful Skills to Help You Handle Stress One Moment at a Time. And the event, The Amazing Teen, From Problem Focus to Positive Youth Development, that's tonight, 5 p.m. at UBC's Green College. We have a lot of emails as we head into budget coverage here on CBC asking you, what does generational fairness mean to you? Marjorie writes, I'm a boomer. In the way I've lived my life, I'm a mix of all. Closer to Gen X and millennial. I rent. I have all my life. Fairness is fairness to all. Karen writes, if we had taxation based on class fairness that ensured the uber wealthy and corporations paid their fair share, we wouldn't have to pit generations against each other over basic needs such as housing, food, and healthcare. Mary writes, regarding your topic, I'm listening to people talk about how Pierre Poilievre will do better. I'm a bit baffled that no one's raising the fact that he has no concrete plans to help the environment, which is the biggest disaster facing our future generations. And another email here from one last email as well from the organizer of the Seniors Tin Cup and writing, I'm hoping the Liberal government will acknowledge the poverty a lot of seniors are living with. Thank you for all of your emails. BC Today at cbc.ca.